Welcome to JGI JCE Connect revision classes on modern interface design. In this video, we shall be revising module 5, that is the window layout test. In this video, we would be covering topics such as the 4 types of tests and different prototypes, as well as different testing techniques that exist. So the overview of this video is to understand the usability testing process and the role it plays in the design of an interface. So we move on with the various testing steps, right? So it is nothing but what are the steps that are involved in testing an interface. So very firstly, we'll have to understand the purpose and the scope of testing, and then develop a prototype of a interface, and then focus on developing the right kind of test plan, that is how exactly you would like to carry out the test of an interface, and then design a test that yields the relevant results or your desired results. And then we are supposed to concentrate on selecting and scheduling proper user participants, selecting and scheduling proper set of users to participate in this testing, and then provide proper testing facilities, that is laboratories, etc., and conducting tests and collecting the required informations. And followed by it, we'll have to analyze whatever data is gathered and generate the design recommendations, and accordingly we'll have to modify the prototype if need be, and after it we'll have to perform the testing of the system again and then evaluate the working system. So these are all the steps that are involved in testing. So what is the purpose of usability testing, right? So firstly, it is used to establish a communication bridge between developers and the users. Through this testing, the developers learn about the user's goal, their perception about the system, and try to understand what are their needs, that is their questions and their problems. And secondly, basically testing is used to evaluate a product. So this usability testing is performed to validate the design decisions. That is, it can also identify the potential problems in the design at a point in the development process where they can be more easily be addressed. Right? So the importance of usability testing process is because the developers and the users possess different models, and that is a thorough usability testing process must be performed, and it is important for several reasons, like what the developers view as well as the users view would be different, right? So you get an understanding, you can balance both models here, and then developers intuitions may not always be correct, right? He'll have to think from the end user perspectives, and it is impossible to predict the usability just from the appearance, and as well as design standards and guidelines are not sufficient to do it. So therefore informal feedback is very inadequate, and problems found later in the step of the design could be more difficult and very expensive to fix in. So therefore usability testing becomes very mandatory, and then it has more advantages over competitive products, right? So you can design a better interface compared to others, right? So what is the scope of testing? So basically, this testing should begin at the very early stages of product development and should continue throughout the development process. It should include as many users' tasks and as many products components as reasonably possible. Right? So therefore, there are four different types of tests that can be performed. They are exploratory tests, followed by the assessment tests, followed by okay. So before moving on to different types of tests, we'll just look into what each individual tests mean by, right? So what are the objectives of each of these evaluation mechanisms? So in case of exploratory evaluation, this is often informal and it is conducted early in the system development process. And its purpose is to explore the user interface design features of a prototype. And it's also performed to gather feedback on preliminary designs. And it is used to verify the assumptions about the users derived during the requirement determination process, right? So the data obtained in exploratory evaluation is mostly qualitative in nature and is based on the discussion that you carry out with the users, right? So the prototypes typically used include hand sketches and scenarios as well as interactive paper prototypes, right? And in case of assessment based evaluations, so these are carried out even early or even in the midway of the development process once the conceptual model has been created. So this conceptual model incorporates information gathered during the exploratory evaluation process. So the purpose of performing assessment evaluation is to establish the knowledge regarding how well users' tasks are supported and to determine what usability problems may exist, right? So the evaluations are conducted using users' task descriptions and measures of the levels of usability of the systems that can be obtained. The outcome of this evaluation may result in refinement of the system's requirements. So similarly, we also have a comparative evaluation, or we call it as comparison evaluation, which may be performed at any stage in the development process. When two or more design alternatives exist, either of which may appear to be possible to achieve, that is, we call a classical experiment. A classic experiment can be developed by comparing both of them directly. So two or more prototypes are constructed and which are identical in all aspects, but except for the design issues, such as they may differ depending upon the type of control or depending upon the wordings of an instruction and so on, right? So here we got to make a better choice depending upon the design issues. So here speed and accuracy measures are collected and user performances are also considering in picking up a classic experiment, right? So similarly, the next one is validation evaluation. So validation evaluations are conducted towards the end of the development cycles when the system is already put into use. So its purpose is to ascertain that the system meets the predetermined usability objectives, right? If you remember usability objectives, we have discussed it in the previous module, that is 5 E's, right? So they may also be conducted to determine how well all of the components of the system work together, right? The result of this evaluation is a determination about whether the components of interface do or do not meet the level of performance that is expected, right? So for this, We always involve all members of the design team in testing to ensure that there is a common reference point for all. Okay, so similarly, moving on to so now we move on to prototypes. So we already have an understanding of what exactly a prototype means, but still we shall revise it. So a prototype is nothing but a simple incomplete model or just a mock-up of a design and is primarily a vehicle for exploration, communication and evaluation. So its purpose is to obtain user input in the design and provide feedback to the designer. So its major function is the communicative role that it plays, and it doesn't focus on accuracy or thoroughness, right? So a prototype enables a design to be better visualized and provides insight into how the software will look like and how it would work. It also aids in defining tasks and their flows and interface itself and its screens, right? So a prototype may have greater breadth, including as many features as possible to present the concept and the overall organization, right? So let us now look into various different types of prototypes that are available to us. So the very first prototype that is available is hand sketches and scenarios. So these prototypes are basically, in this we make use of screen sketches that are created by hand or the drawing packages, and we try to focus on the design but not on the interface mechanism itself, right? So the advantage of such a prototype is they can be used very early in the development process and are suited for use by the entire design team, and there is no large investment of time as well as cost. And in order to draw the hand sketches, we need not have to have any sort of programming skills, and it's very easily portable. You can modify and iterate it frequently and fastly, and similarly a rough approximation often yields more substantive critical comments, so therefore it becomes easier to comprehend than functional specifications and can be used to define the requirements. But it also has some disadvantages, like it is a hand sketch is just a rough approximation, and it is limited in providing an understanding of both the navigation as well as the flow, right? And it is just a demonstration, it is not an exercise. It's always driven by a facilitator rather than the end user of the system, and it has limited usefulness for a usability test. So poor detailed specification for writing the code, it is not sufficient for writing the code, and usually it has very restricted, or it is capable of addressing very restricted common tasks that are being performed by the end user, right? So the next one is the interactive paper prototypes. So it involves the use of office supplies such as post-it notes, transparencies, markers, and scissors. So here the menu bars, pull-down menus, pop-up windows, and screen bodies and so on are created which reflect the system tasks which reflect the system tasks, right? So all these are created using these medias, right? And then the components are manually manipulated to illustrate the dynamics of the software. So the purpose of this kind of prototype is to provide a sense of dynamics of a program without actually having to build a functional version of it. So here it is, its objective is to create a rough vision, right? And it is, and the goal is not to show how exactly a system or the website will look like, but it is just to assess if the people can use this system or a website easily or no, right? So the advantages of this interactive paper prototypes are that these are more illustrative of program dynamics than simple screen sketches, and the system components can be manipulated to demonstrate the interactive nature of the system, right? So then there also comes a set of disadvantages of this interactive paper prototypes. So disadvantages are similar to that of our hand-drawn sketches. That is, they are just a rough approximation and or they are just the demonstrations, but they are not the actual exercises, and they are also driven by the facilitator but not the end user, and they possess limited usefulness for usability testing, right? So followed by it is a prototype called as programmed facets, right? So this is performed to provide a realistic surface view of the real program and to illustrate the program's functioning, right? So using prototyping tools such as Microsoft PowerPoint and Visual Basics, examples of finished dialogues and screens for some important aspects of the system can be constructed and viewed, right? So facet is very shallow, duplicating only small portion of what is ultimately intended, both in depth and breadth. Because of this shallow nature, it is best described as medium fidelity to high fidelity prototype, right? So, what are the advantages of such a prototype? So, while much is missing, what is visible can provide a good impression of the finished design, and it also provides a good detailed specification for writing the code, and it acts as a vehicle for actual collection of data. Similarly, its associated disadvantages are it's a highly polished product and can foster a sense of finality because of its appearance. And significant reorganization and restructuring suggestions may also be inhibited, with the focus simply being on the screen cosmetics. Right? So, secondly, false exception that the real thing is only a short time away may be easily be created, even though much work still has to be performed, right? And these are also more expensive to develop than the paper based prototypes, and they may also take longer times to be developed, and not all functions may be demonstrated, and because of the cost issue as well as the schedule limitations and the lack of user interest to participate in the process, right? So therefore they are not practical for investigating more than 2 or 3 alternate design approaches. So, followed by it, we have prototype oriented languages, right? So, here these are used to present an example of completed dialogues and screens for some part of the systems, right? Using programming languages that support actual programming process. So, these mean examples include Power Builder, Visual Basics, and so on. Using these tools, real programs can be created to illustrate some programs' functionality and mechanisms of the interface, right? So the advantages of this type of prototype is they may include the final code, otherwise they are generally the same as those of the programmed facets, right? And the disadvantages again remain the same as that for the programmed facets.